Hello, Year 10. So, while you're off school for the next 2 weeks, all of your lessons are going to be completed via this YouTube channel and these videos that are here. Now, we're going to be working through the next topic, which is homeostasis. We're not going to complete it in that time because it's a really long one, but we're going to start off and we're going to get as much time as we can possibly do. And because we're going to be completing work that is actually on the GCSE course, I'm going to anticipate that when you come back in, you will already know this work. There will be no going back over these topics, except where you ask questions on Teams and your teacher is able to help you that way. Now, it's going to be run exactly the same as a normal lesson. You use the same PowerPoints as you would be using in your normal lesson, and we're going to do the same tasks as you would be doing in your normal lesson. For that reason, you need to treat it as if you were in school. Now, you're going to sit and you're going to have tasks appear on the board. I'm going to tell you what to do, and you should work for the amount of time that I tell you to work on them, and make sure that you complete the tasks in full. Now, if you are willing to work hard on this, there will be no difference between this and being in school, particularly if you're willing to send any questions you have to your teachers on Teams to make sure that you actually do understand the work. The only difficulty will come with those people who skip through this video as fast as they can in order to get on with the work. You should be spending as close to the full 50 minutes on this as possible. For each task, I'll tell you how long to spend. You then need to pause the video and work for that long. So maybe you need a timer on your phone to tell you how long you've worked. You also need to record this in your book as normal. So if you like a topic page, the new topic is called homeostasis. I'll put that term on the board. Let's do that. So the new topic title is this, and the title for today is thermoregulation. Now, thermoregulation is a particular type of homeostasis, and throughout this topic we're going to be talking about different types of homeostasis. So, today we'll learn about what thermoregulation is, how the body thermoregulates itself, and the outcomes of thermoregulation. Now, I'm aware that some people have already done this in class with Miss Issett while I was away during my paternity leave. I still recommend you go through this video. However, if you have already done it, then that may make sense for you to skip through some bits that you definitely understand. But make sure you get to the end of this video and you know every bit of it. So, the first thing is I'd like you to write down the definition of homeostasis. Homeostasis is the way in which the body keeps conditions inside itself the same. It's the way it maintains its internal conditions, is another way of saying that. Basically, if you don't want something about you to change, I'll give you an example of your temperature. You don't want your temperature to change too much, then that needs to be controlled by your body, and that is what homeostasis is. So there is a homeostasis of temperature, keeping temperature the same. Now, underneath that little note, which you're going to have, homeostasis is the way in which the body keeps conditions inside it the same, I'd like you to write down a list of as many conditions that you can think of which your body needs to keep the same. So you could write types of homeostasis. The first one on the list should be temperature. What else can you think which you would not want to change inside your body? I'd like you to spend just a minute and a half on that, 90 seconds on that. So if you can pause the video now and spend 90 seconds, make sure you've got the notes and then a list of as many as you can think of. So hopefully you paused the video, hopefully you've got that list. Now, the full list that I've got here, the answers if you like, those are by no means exhaustive, is temperature is my first one, blood sugar. You don't want your blood sugar to change too much, and we'll learn all about that next lesson. Blood pH, how acidic your blood is, you definitely don't want that to change too much, and so again, you have to maintain that. That's a type of homeostasis. Heart rate, breathing rate, how fast your cell divide, how fast you create sperm or eggs. And of course there are probably hundreds if not thousands of other things that you would not want to change inside your body. And we're going to learn about a lot of these over the course of the next 4 or 5 weeks. Now, today we're going to look at a specific type of homeostasis, which is thermoregulation. Now, thermoregulation, which is the title, if you didn't get that down already, is the homeostasis of temperature. Now, the question then is, why is that important for the body? Now, there is one place where I've learned where temperature will really severely affect things inside your body. It was back in year 9, and that is in digestion. And we learned about enzymes. Now, if I do that, have a look at that graph. Now, you learned about this in year 8. Could not quite remember if you had completed this in year 9 or not. I'd like you to have a look at that graph and write down in as much detail as possible what this graph is that's describing it, i.e. what can you see, what happens to enzyme activity as you go up in temperature. You can all do that one. So what does the graph do? Describe. And then explain, why is this happening? So again, pause the video. This should take you about 3 minutes. So pause for 3 minutes and get this written down in 4 sentences. So, looking at this graph, the first thing you can do is describe, and that will always be worth at least 1 mark on any exam question when we do them. So describe, you can say that initially, as temperature increases, so does enzyme activity. So initially, as the temperature goes up, enzyme activity goes up. Until you reach 40 degrees, which you can call the optimum temperature. And then enzyme activity will start to decrease dramatically until it reaches 0. And that's a description, that's 1 mark, and everybody can get that. In terms of explaining that, firstly, initially, as it gets warmer, you increase the amount of kinetic energy. Now, hopefully everyone remembers that enzymes, the ones you've learnt about at least, are used to digest food. And they're used to smash into food molecules and basically break them into small pieces that can be absorbed into your small intestine. Now you need that to work as fast as possible, and initially as you increase the temperature, the enzyme activity will increase because the enzymes will be traveling faster, where they have more kinetic energy. So when enzyme activity increases, that's because the kinetic energy, the speed of the enzyme is increasing, so it's hitting the molecules with more force, and it's also going to be more likely to hit molecules. My example is always, if I got a pen and a pen lid, and I was in this room, and I threw them around, and they could bounce off all walls everywhere, there's 0 gravity, I need them to smash into each other, it's going to be much more likely if they're travelling at speed. You can imagine if they're travelling at a turtle's pace and I throw a pen in one direction and a pen lid in the other direction, it's going to take a long time for them to bounce off the ceilings and the walls and hit each other. But if they're travelling at hundreds of miles an hour and they're bouncing off a wall every second, eventually they're going to smash into each other and it's going to be a lot faster. So enzyme activity is faster because the enzymes themselves are moving faster. Then they reach their optimum temperature at 40 degrees. After that point, the enzymes are denaturing because they get too hot. When they get too hot, the enzymes are made of proteins. They're going to break. They're going to change their structure. They're going to change their shape so that the enzymes don't work anymore because they've denatured. Again, this is all year 9 material. I strongly suggest that if you don't remember this, you go back to the digestion topic in year 9 and in the textbook or in your notes, just make sure you understand this. But then the question is, what does this have to do with thermoregulation? And the answer is, if you don't control your temperature correctly, your enzymes are not going to work. If you're too cold, the enzymes are going to work too slowly, down at the bottom end of this graph. If you're too hot, the enzymes aren't going to work at all. They're going to denature. So you need to maintain your temperature around the high 30s mark, otherwise you won't have any enzymes that work. And the thing is, enzymes aren't just found in your digestive system, they're found in all of your cells, and if you don't have enzymes that work, you just die. That's why people can die of high fevers. When they get really hot, their enzymes denature, and you can die of that. So, it's essential. You have to understand why thermoregulation is essential. It's because the enzymes have to be kept at the right temperature. The next thing you have to understand is how thermoregulation works. Now I'm going to show you 3 slides of notes, and I'd like you actually not to write these down at this point. I'd just like you to listen to what I'm saying to you, read the notes, and there's going to be a task at the end which I'm going to ask you to do. So don't write anything down at this point. So there are 3 steps here. The first step in any homeostasis is to detect what is happening. If your body doesn't know what temperature you are, it obviously can't control the temperature. So the first step is to detect the temperature. And the way the body does that is it has thermoreceptors in your skin, and it also has thermoreceptors in your blood. What I mean by thermoreceptors is receptors for heat. Now the blood is actually probably the most important one, really. Because if your skin is a bit cold, it can cause you damage. But if your blood is cold, that's going to your brain, to all your organs. That is what causes a real issue. So whenever you get too hot or too cold, these thermoreceptors are activated. They're turned on. And your body knows, okay, I'm too hot or okay, I'm too cold. Step 2. We want to send that information to your central nervous system. Now we know the central nervous system from our nervous system topic is what pretty much controls all decision making in your body. Now they send nerve impulses, these thermoreceptors, to an area of your brain in your hypothalamus, which is labelled here, called the thermoregulatory centre. Now, hopefully everyone's got an idea of how these impulses could be sent, and they're going to be sent as electrical impulses through your nerves. So step 1 is we detect it with your thermoreceptors. Step 2 is we send that information to your hypothalamus, to your thermoregulatory centre. And your body has to do something about that. Step 3 is the response. It sends nerve impulses, the thermoregulatory centre sends nerve impulses to your skin, to your muscles, to your blood vessels, and they initiate the responses you might need, like shivering, sweating. We're going to talk about all the different types of responses in just a minute. So, 3 steps: detection, transmission, response. Now, I'd like you to have a look at that and write down these notes in the correct order. And that's basically just to make sure that everyone's understood this point. So it's the same notes, pretty much, but in the wrong order. I'd like you to complete that. Sorry, my recording went a bit funny. So I'd like you to complete that now. It should take about, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes. So say 2 minutes at the very minimum. Make sure you've got all these notes in full in your books in the correct order. So pause the video now. So, hopefully you have completed that. And the order should be that first, thermoreceptors in your blood and skin detect a change in temperature. Then secondly, it sends a nerve impulse to the thermoregulatory centre in the hypothalamus. Thirdly, the thermoregulatory centre interprets the nerve impulses from the body. The nerve impulses are then sent to the skin and muscles, and your body responds to the change in temperature by sweating or shivering or some other response. Now, just to make sure, again, we've got all of that. 3 questions there. Can you make sure you can answer those questions? I don't need you to write them out in full sentences, just the answer, because you should already have the notes down. So have 30 seconds to a minute on this. Just write down 1-word answer for each one. Again, pause the video. So, the name given to the receptors is thermoreceptors. The part of the brain that controls the thermoregulatory centre is the thermoregulatory centre in the hypothalamus, and the signals are sent from the receptors to the brain via nerve impulses in the nerves. Okay, so let's move on again. Now, again, this should be quite straightforward, and I'd like you to draw this table in from your own knowledge. I'd like you to write down whatever you can think of, ways that your body would respond to you becoming too hot or too cold. So the final part of this understanding of thermoregulation is to understand what the response would be. So you have just, I reckon, 3 minutes once you've drawn the table and got it all written out. So make sure this is in your book. Too hot, too cold, what are the responses? So we're looking at several different responses. When you're too hot, you're talking about something like sweating. Now, sweating works because when water evaporates, it takes energy out of its environment. When it makes the environment that it's in colder. Now, you may have experienced this if you've ever got any ethanol on your hands in a chemistry practical. When you get ethanol in your hands start to feel really cold. And that's because the ethanol is evaporating. Same thing with sweat. When it evaporates, it makes you cold. When you're too cold, you're looking at something like shivering. Now, shivering worked because it makes your muscles move. When your muscles move, they do respiration to release the energy for movement, and that releases heat because aerobic respiration is an exothermic reaction. Picture sitting in your car with the engine on, but not going anywhere. You want to run the car because you want the heater to be working to keep you warm, but you don't actually want to go anywhere. In the same way, you can be sitting still in a seat, shivering. It's basically turning your muscles over as if you were going for a run or a walk, but you're not going anywhere. You're still getting that heat because the aerobic respiration is an exothermic reaction. The other two things you need to know about, and these are not necessarily things I would expect you to write down, are vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Now, I'm aware this is something I believe you do in PE. So if you've already completed it in PE, you probably already know about this. But we have to understand that blood is warm. Blood is actually one of the warmest parts of your body. It's where most heat is in your body. The part of the body which releases most heat tends to be closest to the skin. So if you can get your blood close to the skin, it will release lots of heat into the environment. If you take your blood away from the skin, it won't release much heat into the environment. Now you have these kind of spare extra little bits of capillaries that will go right near the surface of your skin. When you are too hot and you want heat to get out, you want blood to go into these blood vessels. Basically, you want to open up the little pathway out of the main blood vessel and into this capillary network here. And you do that by something called vasodilation. Vaso for blood vessel, dilation getting bigger. Like when your pupils dilate, they get bigger. So you make your blood vessels near your skin bigger, wider, more blood can get to the skin, and so lots of heat is lost. That's ideal if you're very hot. This is why people go red when it's really hot. They get flushed cheeks. That's because the blood vessels near their skin are opening up wide to allow lots of blood near their skin, release that heat from the blood into the outside environment. If you're too cold, that's obviously the last thing you want. So what you do is something called vasoconstriction. Basically, you squeeze up those blood vessels, stop them opening up, and so none of the blood can get near the skin, and so all of the blood is away from the skin and you don't lose much heat. That's called vasoconstriction for the same reason. Blood vessel, vasoconstriction, squeezing. Boa constrictor. So this is the hardest bit of this topic, remembering which one's vasodilation and which one's vasoconstriction. If you can remember out these blood vessels near the skin and think about when I'd want them to be open and when I'd want them to be closed, that'll make much more easy for you. So I need you to make sure you've got these notes down, pause the video and make sure you've got those notes down. And then we're going to move on with something like this. So the question is, why can't you thermally image a polar bear? Now, this is trying to get you to think about ways to stop your body from losing heat. And polar bears obviously are in a cold environment. Now, think about what kind of things a bear will be doing in order to prevent heat loss. Firstly, it will be making sure that it is got thick fur and thick blubber so that heat can't easily escape. It will also be doing vasoconstriction to stop heat escaping from out of its skin. And that means less heat will be lost to the environment, so it will be harder to see it under a thermal image. Similarly, would it be easier to use thermal goggles to see people when it's hot or when it's cold? Be easier when it is hot, because what's going to happen is all the blood's going to come to the skin. They're going to lose lots of heat to the surrounding environment, and so they're going to be really clear under a thermal image. Now, have a look at this question. This is a really easy question. This is the first part of a question on thermoregulation. I'd like you to have a look at that and basically just write down what word would go in each section. And again, pause the video if you haven't already. So hopefully everybody wrote that a cyclist's body temperature is monitored by a sensor in the brain. The sensor is sensitive to the temperature of the cyclist's blood. And if the cyclist's body temperature increases, his body increases the production of sweat. A harder question is this one. I'd like you to write this one out in full. The human body is kept at a constant temperature of about 37 degrees C, roughly. Body temperature is monitored and controlled by the thermoregulatory center in the brain, and describe what happens in the body to keep the body temperature constant. So, 6 marks. Think about what would you have to write here, and I want a paragraph written here. This should take you 5 or 6 minutes. You need to pause the video and get this written out absolutely in full. Okay, so hopefully everyone has found that they've got a good paragraph here from what we've just said. And if you can answer this question, then you've definitely understood the topic for today. Like any 6 marker, it's sorted into levels, but we're going to skip those for a minute. We're going to talk about the kind of things you definitely should be writing. So, firstly, you need to understand about temperature receptors. You could say thermoreceptors or temperature receptors, that they detect blood temperature, or you could say body temperature. And you also need to say about temperature receptors in the skin. Then you want to talk about vasodilation and why that's a good thing, that more blood flows through the skin and more heat is lost. Then you need to talk about sweat and why that's a good thing, that it evaporates. Then you want to talk about what happens when you're too cold, that you've got vasoconstriction, and shivering. It's kind of skipped the bit about transmitting the information to the thermoregulatory center because it's already told you what the thermoregulatory center is. But if you have written down all 11 of these points, then that's fantastic. Whenever you're doing a 6 marker, you have to write down more than 6 points. It's a common misconception because with these levels, it's not about how many points you've got down, it's about how good your answer is. So you need to be writing down most of these. If you didn't get any of these, I'd like you to add them to your answer. And this answer is effectively going to be a really good, just paragraph description of thermoregulation. So if you ever forget anything, you can go back and make sure you have a look down this paragraph and understand it. And once you've done that, that's actually the end. That's the end of thermoregulation. Now, hopefully you've got that. It's not, I think, too difficult a topic, and it shouldn't have taken you the full 50 minutes, really. The video's been 23 minutes long-ish, and we've probably had another 20 minutes of gaps in there somewhere. From today, you need to understand, and let me skip back up to the lesson objectives, you need to understand what the thermoregulation is, how the body thermoregulates itself. That's going to include how it knows to control the temperature and the responses, and you need to know what the outcomes of thermoregulation are and how they work, i.e. how does shivering work, how does sweating work, how does vasodilation work, how does vasoconstriction work. If you feel like you understand all of that, then that is it. That's the end of thermoregulation. Now the next lesson we're going to do is much more difficult. It's on blood sugar homeostasis, so please make sure that you have completed this lesson well in advance. This needs writing down, and you need to upload your notes to Teams so that your teacher can see that you have actually done the work. Have a good afternoon.